Hey there, pirates! We're back for another chapter in our new story, A Crazy Day with Cobras. Now, Jack and Annie had just met up with Kathleen and Teddy, and they had told us some horrible news about how Penny, the penguin, had been turned to stone by a spell. So they're in a search for a way to break that spell. So chapter 2 is titled The Red Fort. Kathleen and Teddy were gone. The air was hot. Flies buzzed around Jack's head. "These are ambassadors' clothes," said Annie. Jack and Annie were dressed alike. They both wore wide-brimmed felt hats, stockings, buckled shoes, short jackets, and a puffy short pants. Jack's backpack had turned into a leather bag. "I guess," said Jack, "this must be how you would have dressed almost 400 years ago in Frog Creek." "If we'd both been boys," said Annie. "So here we are." Jack and Annie looked out the window. The treehouse had landed in a row of tall, dark trees. The trees stood next to a red fort with a moat, a drawbridge, and a massive red battlements. "Cool fort," said Jack. "Yeah, and look, elephants," said Annie. "I love elephants." Leading away from the fort were two streets. One was filled with ox pulling carts, and people riding horses and elephants. Veiled women sat in the carriages on the elephants' backs. "Yeah, and there's a bazaar like the one we saw in Baghdad," said Jack. He pointed to the other street, which was lined with tents and stalls. What a cool place. "So where do you think we find an emerald stone in the shape of a rose?" said Annie. Jack picked up their research book and opened the first page. He read aloud. "In the 1600s, India was a vast land of crowded cities and countless villages. A great deal of India, though, was still covered by wilderness. Wild creatures such as cheetahs, elephants, and Bengal tigers lived in the forests. India's wilderness was also home for many snakes, including the king cobra, one of the deadliest snakes on earth." "Yikes," said Annie. She and Jack looked at the pictures of the Bengal tiger and a king cobra. The growling tiger had a huge head and enormous teeth. The cobra had speckled yellow bands around its long body. Its open jaws revealed two big, sharp fangs. "Don't worry," said Jack with a shiver. "We definitely didn't land in the wilderness." He turned the page until he found a drawing of the red fort. "Yes, here's exactly where we landed," he said. "For several centuries," it read, "mighty rulers known as Great Moguls ruled over much of India. The wealthiest of the Moguls was Shah Jahan. He lived inside the red fort, where he was protected night and day by imperial guards." "So the Great Mogul lived right here?" said Annie. "How lucky is that?" She and Jack looked at the fort again. "I guess those guys must be Imperial Guards," Jack said. He pointed to the men in white coats and leggings guarding the drawbridge. Some carried spears, and others had bow and arrows. "Right, but who do you think those guys are?" asked Annie, pointing. Two carts pulled by pairs of white oxen had stopped at the entrance of the bridge. 8 men climbed out of the carts. They wore outfits like Jack and Annie's: puffy pants, short jackets, and wide hats. Two of the guards greeted them with deep bows. "They're dressed like us," said Jack, "so I guess they must be ambassadors too. If they're visiting the Great Mogul, we could join them maybe," said Annie. "Hold on," said Jack. He opened his bag. As he put their book inside, he noticed that everything had been in his backpack was still there. His story from school, the note about the emerald rose, and the blue bottle with the potion to make them small. "Okay, we've got everything," he said. "Come on, before we miss our chance," Annie called out, starting down the rope ladder. "Wait," said Jack. He put his bag over his shoulder and hurried after Annie. By the time he stepped off the ladder, Annie was already heading down the drawbridge for the fort. "Annie, hold on. We have to talk about something important," Jack said. He didn't want her to say anything crazy to the guards or to the ambassadors. What? Said Annie, waiting for him. If they're real ambassadors, we shouldn't get too close to them, Jack said. They'll figure out that we're fakes. Oh, good point, said Annie. So let's wait until they start across the bridge, said Jack. Then we'll run to the gate and tell the guards that we're supposed to be with them. And don't forget, if anyone asks, you're my brother. Oh, you should stick your braids under your hat. Right, said Annie. She tucked her pigtails under her hat. How's that? Fine, I guess, said Jack. He was still worried about the fact that Annie looked too young. We have to try to act like ambassadors, don't forget. So stand up straight and speak in a low, deep voice. Okay, don't worry, said Annie. And we should hold up our chins, said Jack. Try to look taller. Okay. Oh, look, they're leaving, said Annie. Let's go. The ambassadors had climbed back into their ox carts. As the carts started across the moat, Jack and Annie walked quickly towards the bridge. The first guard held up his spear. Who are you? He asked. He had a long purple scar on his cheek and silver rings in his ears. We are ambassadors, Jack said in a deep voice. We are with the gentleman who just crossed the bridge. The guard gave Jack and Annie a sharp look. You are with the ambassadors from Europe? He said. Yes, Jack stood straighter, but we're from Frog Creek. I imagine you're thinking that we look very young, Annie said in a low voice. Well, it is true. We are young, but we are very smart. I see, said the guard. And imaginative and creative, Annie said. Oh, brother, thought Jack. Shh. I see, said the guard again. He looked at Jack's bag. And this is where you carry your treasures? Your gifts for the Great Mogul? Well, said Jack. What gifts do you ambassadors from Europe usually give Great Moguls? Annie asked. The gifts sent by kings and queens to Europe are always rare and beautiful, said the guards. Such as, said Annie. Silver swords, gold goblets, treasure chests filled with jewels and coins, said the guard. Or perhaps the fastest horse from Arabia. Forget it, thought Jack. But Annie smiled. I see, she said. Well, I am pleased to tell you that we have brought a gift far greater than any of those things. Very good, the guard said. The Great Mogul eagerly awaits your arrival and your treasures. What treasures, thought Jack. What is Annie talking about? You may pass through the gates, said the guard. Follow the other ambassadors to the hall of public audience, where the Great Mogul appears each morning before his court nobles. Thanks, said Annie. She pulled Jack along towards the drawbridge. And do not worry, the guard called out after them. The Great Mogul will not mind your youth. His grandfather became emperor when he was 13 years old. Super! Thanks, Annie called back. Hey, what are you talking about back there? Jack whispered as he and Annie started across the bridge. We didn't bring any treasures for the Great Mogul. We didn't bring anything. Yes, we did, said Annie. What? Tell me what, said Jack. Your story, said Annie. It's in your bag, right? You've got to be kidding, said Jack. That's not treasure. Yes, it is. Think about it. You printed your story in fancy curly type from the computer, right, said Annie. I did my drawings with sparkle pens. There were no computers or sparkle pens 400 years ago. The Great Mogul has never seen writing and artwork like that. Our ordinary stuff would be treasures in this time. I don't know. Jack didn't know what to think. He just shook his head. It would be, trust me, said Annie. And hurry. We don't want to lose those other ambassadors. She ran to the entrance of the Red Fort. Jack followed her. They passed through a gateway that opened onto a stone road. The road led to a large square. At the opposite side of the square was a long, low building with columns and arches. There they are, said Annie. She pointed to the ambassadors' ox carts rolling towards the building. That must be the hall of public audience, said Jack. Jack and Annie walked quickly towards the building. The air felt as if it were coming from a hot furnace. By the time they arrived at the hall, Jack felt faint from the heat and almost passed out. The ambassadors from Europe had already gone inside. Fierce-looking guards stood at the entrance. Daggers and curved swords hung from their belts. Annie walked up to one of the burly guards. Excuse me, she said in a low voice, "but we are ambassadors from Frog Creek, and we are supposed to be with the other ambassadors." To Jack's surprise, the guard asked no questions. He nodded and gestured for them to go in. Annie and Jack followed the guard into the shadowy hall. The air inside was much cooler. It smelled of roses and mint. Hidden musicians played soft music. The burly guard escorted Jack and Annie past the audience of court nobles. All men had beards or mustaches and wore beautiful coats of many colors and patterns. Bright orange, purple, turquoise, green striped, and pale pink with flowers. Next to the nobles, the 8 ambassadors from Europe stood along a silver railing. They were lined up in pairs. The burly guard ushered Jack and Annie to the end of the line. Everyone in the hall was facing a high platform with wide steps. The platform was made of sparkling diamonds, emeralds, and pearls. Gold columns supported the golden canopy above the platform. Statues of 2 jeweled peacocks with rubies in their beaks were perched above the canopy. Over the golden canopy was another canopy of rich cloth. Tall, thin candlesticks held flickering candles, and servants sprayed rose-scattered water into the air. As Annie looked around at everything, Jack slipped their book out of the bag. He huddled over it and read it to himself. Wow. How cool. Every morning, the great Mogul sat on his peacock throne in the hall of public audience. He demanded complete respect. Everyone had to be perfectly still and silent in his presence. No one was allowed to sit or leave as long as he was in the hall. If his guests spoke to him without permission, he did not bow the proper way. He could have them put in prison. "Oh, man," said Jack. He shoved the book back into his bag and turned to Annie. "Don't speak," he whispered, "and we have to bow the proper way." "Don't worry. We learned how to bow in that palace in Vienna," Annie said. "No, this is different," whispered Jack. "When I messed up there, people just laughed. Here, you go to jail." "Oh, well, don't forget, we've got our potion from Kathleen," Annie whispered. "If worse comes to worse, we can make ourselves small and escape." "Forget it," Jack whispered. "I don't want to be a tiny person. The guards will just chase us down and squash us like bugs." Annie laughed. "This isn't funny," said Jack. "Let's go back outside and make another plan. We don't know what we're doing here." "Yes, we do," Annie said. "We're going to give your story to the Great Mogul, and then we're going to ask him for an emerald rose. Simple." No, said Jack. "I told you we can't say a word to him. Not a single word. Come on, we have to leave while we're still alive." Annie sighed. "Okay, fine," she said. But as Jack and Annie turned to go, trumpets blasted, shattering this quiet air. The trumpet sounds were followed by deafening drum roll. Shah Jahan, the Great Mogul of India, stepped through a door at the back of the hall. And that's the end of the chapter. So, boys and girls, I want you to think of a new character that we just met. It could be any character. I want you to think of that new character, and I want you to draw your picture of that new character. And maybe throw in some details, throw in some labels. And then write a sentence or two about your new character. Okay, guys? Hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I will see you tomorrow. Adios.